I'm back. And I figured the good topic for today would be talking about if you're a singer and you're thinking of coming into SLP, speech language pathology, in the United States. I cannot talk about requirements in other countries because I do not live in other countries. So, so if you're in Canada or somewhere else, I'm not sure. But for the United States, here's what you can expect if you're interested in coming into the field. And I think I'm going to post another video about my experiences coming into the field and the things that sort of surprised me about it. But first thing to expect, if you don't have an undergraduate in it, it's going to take you 3 years before you can start making some money in this field. Just to let you know. 3 years before you get a job, okay? Because there are a certain number of undergraduate requirements that the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, www.asha.org, requires before you can start on a master's degree and before you can see clients at the master's degree level. So those classes, let me see, I made a little list for myself. Let's see, you have to get, there are areas, so you have to learn stuff about language and cognition and healthy development and healthy adults, essentially. So kids who are typically developing and adults who are just relatively healthy people, what are the abilities of those people in terms of language and cognition, cognition being like how we think. Okay, like how do we form memories? How do we make decisions? How do we do these sort of things? That's like a cognition part. Not the emotional part of how we make decisions. That's probably more of the psychological component. But we focus more on like, hey, you need a functioning part of this brain to make some sort of long-term plan for this goal you want to get to. Yeah, and if that part is damaged, you're going to have a hard time making plans to get to the goal where you're going to get to. It's not going to be easy for you. Okay. So you learn about that stuff. You learn about anatomy and physiology of communication, which tends to be essentially torso up minus the arms and hands. You learn, for the most part, yeah, some acoustics, little physics in there, usually college algebra level math. So not too bad, but some math. You need to probably be aware of that, I guess, because there are a fair number of math-phobic folk in the United States. And let's see, so what you could do to start out, where to do these undergraduate classes, yeah. You could either do it through a 3-year master's program. So if you have one near your area and you apply and you get in and you already have an undergraduate degree, you could do a 3-year master's, which would be the first year you're doing undergraduate courses, but you're listed as a graduate student, so if you need financial aid or anything, it could come out as a graduate student. Then what else do you have? You have what I did, essentially, but you can go to like a state school or you can take the undergraduate courses as a non-degree seeking student a lot of times, like on a continuing education essential basis at a different school, if the 3-year master's program is not an option for you. That can be a little challenging, like to get into the classes if they tend to fill up, so that's something to find out and how the timing works for you to sign up for the classes. Then, once you've done that year, if you're coming from like a theater background or a music background and you didn't go to a major university, if you went to like a smaller liberal arts college or something, and you didn't actually have a lot of science or math requirements, that's also something to be aware of. ASHA does require a certain number of general education requirements to get into our field. So you have to have, I believe, or at least at the time that I was looking, you had to take either Physics 1 or Chemistry 1, like a 101 course. You had to take psychology. I think 2 psychology courses, because I took 2, and I think I saw on ASHA's website I had to, so I think that's why I did that, if I remember right. But so psychology, I took Psychology 101 and I took Developmental Psychology. It's a good choice. You have to have a statistics course. It can be at the undergraduate level, but you do need to take a statistics course. So that's a math course. I think it can be through pretty much any department though, and undergraduate statistics isn't the worst thing ever, so it's not too bad. You also can take, you also have to take college algebra, like I said. If you haven't had that level, you have to at least have taken college algebra. And let's see, what else is there? Trying to think. Oh, and biology. That's what it is. Yes, you have to take at least like one biology course. So I think those are still the requirements. You can always check Ash's website because I'm pretty sure I have them listed out. So if you don't have those, like for me, that was another year of taking classes. I mean, that was like another full load of classes. So I guess from the time of taking my leveling courses to finishing the master's was really 4 years because I went to a community college for my general science and math requirements. Let's see. Also, yeah, so then when you apply to master's degree, the master's degree is very competitive. There are a lot of linguistics people who come into this field, people who have bachelor's degree in linguistics because of the language side of speech-language pathologist. And the fact that SLP jobs, you can get a job. I mean, it might not be the ideal job, but you can get a job like in a school working with kids. That there's almost always a need in the schools for speech-language pathologists, and the pay for that can vary a lot depending on the state you're in. Some states pay them like they're teachers, and some states pay them like they're actually like therapists who could get paid a lot more if they're not working in the schools. So, I don't know what's up with that, but yeah, some schools are like, they just, you know, some states anyway, if you work through like a contract company, a lot of times you're getting paid, you know, probably about the salary you would if you're working in a different setting. But if you're getting paid on the teacher scale, you're usually below what you could get from like a private clinic working with kids or, you know, other options out there. So it is kind of interesting. But there you go. Guess that's education for you in the United States. Okay, so yeah, so there is that. Master's programs are competitive to get into. There's kind of a natural bottleneck. Usually schools can only take so many people in their master's program because there's a certain number of clinical rotation hours you have to get in. You have to spend a certain number of hours with kids and a certain number of hours with adults who have disorders that you're treating under the supervision of a clinical instructor. So you have to know that there is quite a bottleneck there. So if you didn't get into a 3-year master's program, you want to make sure you're getting A's and you're getting yourself as good of a resume as you can to get into graduate school, because it's a pretty darn competitive thing to get in. So good grades, volunteering, if you can get research experience, that's always a plus probably. Volunteer with kids, volunteer at clinics. You will have to observe a certain number of hours clinically, so that you essentially know what you're getting into, you know? But you do have to observe clinical work. For me, it was unfolded as part of our class. We had to write papers on what we observed, so I think most programs tend to do it that way, where you have to get it as part of your assignments for class. You have observation hours you have to do. Oh, and at the undergraduate level, you also learn a lot about hearing and audiology and hearing loss, because we actually overlap with audiology at the undergraduate level. So at the graduate school level is where you split. So that's where people make the decision, do I want to go into being an audiologist who works with people with hearing loss, or do I want to do speech-language pathology? There are speech-language pathologists who work with hearing loss populations, especially kids with hearing loss, to help with their understanding of speech. But it is still a very different area of work, so something to be aware of. Sorry. Excuse me. So, yes, let's see. So you'll be in a master's program for 2 years. It is intensive, natural bottleneck. I think in cities there usually are slightly larger cohorts because they have more space, but for me, like my master's degree wasn't in a major metropolis, but it was... we had 25 people, I believe, to start out with at the master's level, and we lost, I think one person dropped out, so we ended up having 24 people. So pretty small little group to go through a program, but that's why there's jobs, because there's only so many that can graduate every year, essentially, in this field. So I guess in that sense it's good. Just doesn't feel good while you're applying, you know, when you're in that stressful will I get in stage. That's not fun. but so the master's degree, a lot of programs do this differently, but I think it's fairly universal that you'll probably be going to school most of the year, really. In the summer, people usually either take coursework that they didn't take, or they do clinical rotations. In my program, we did clinical rotations in the summer between the first and the second year. So you'll be working essentially full-time clinically and getting a lot of clinical rotation hours in during that summer. So it's something to be aware of, especially if you're thinking, oh, I'll do performances in the summer. I can do like those summer gigs and go do a show with that summer troupe that I've been working with or whatever. You might not be able to. So be aware of that. Financial aid can be hard to come by in master's degrees. It probably depends from state to state in terms of how much funding the school might have. But clinical masters are not usually masters you get paid to do. At my school, if you were a research assistant or a teacher's assistant, you are only allowed to do it quarter time, which means you make half the money of if you were like a part-time RA or TA. And that meant that you had half of your tuition paid, but you had to pay the other half, and your salary for the month would be half of what a part-time RA or TA would make. So I don't know if that's the same for other schools, but I would believe it if it were, just because the amount of work you have to do is pretty intensive. So quarter time meant you had to do 10 hours of the TA or the RA work if you got one. And not everybody had TAs and RAs. They had some out-of-state tuition scholarships that brought us up to essentially in-state tuition levels. I did get one of those. But yeah, so getting a full ride to do a clinical program is very rare. So you might luck out. You might be the person who gets the full ride, but don't go into it counting on it. Something to be aware of. So if you're like me and you already had debt from your music stuff or your theater stuff, just be aware of that. You might need to be taking out a little extra, which is why I went the community college route and the state college route for the undergraduate requirements, because I thought, let's make this as cheap as possible. So, yeah. Okay, so that's a bit of what you can expect. It is a scientifically focused degree. They will want to see that you have an ability to think critically somewhat, that you are not too math phobic anyway, like you could at least do, algebra and undergraduate level stats. You can understand statistics to some degree conceptually. And yeah, so that's getting through the clinical degree. If you are crazy like me and you think you want a PhD in the field, that is another option, but it is separate from a clinical degree. So I did a clinical degree first, and I'm going to be going back to finish the PhD after this year once I get my official clinical license out of the way. So PhD is a doctorate of philosophy. It is a research-focused degree. It is what you learn. It's essentially where you learn how to do science, how to do experimental science. And there is a surprising amount of stuff to learn with that. You have to learn how to design your studies, how to do the statistics for them, even if you're not the one doing the heavy lifting on the statistics. You might have a statistician helping you out, but you still want to know something about it. So you learn a lot more about statistics than you do in an undergraduate course. You need to think about a lot of things in terms of how you're designing your study. What tools are you using to investigate? Like, what equipment are you using? What equipment do you have available? What money do you have available and in your lab or anything for these things? And, so you have a research question, but you also have to think, okay, do I have the resources to answer that question? Is something to consider. And also, okay, if I don't have the resources, is there another question I can ask that can kind of get to the right idea of what I want? Personally, I'm doing a PhD because I have an insatiable need to have some sort of way to explore the hows and the whys of weird things I see clinically. It is something I knew about myself as a voice teacher, the fact that there's a lack of consensus and this person says this is what's happening and this person says that's what's happening, that always drove me nuts in pedagogy, because I want to know for real, like, what's going on? Like, why does it work for this person and not for that person? I'm insatiable about it. So I want a way to explore my curiosity in a rigorous way that hopefully will illuminate something, give me some sense that perhaps a question I had, or maybe a thought I had, if it's wrong, I want my mind to be changed by the results, and if it's right, I just want to feel like, yay, I found some evidence that it's right, and it's not just me, and I'm not just crazy, and hopefully this evidence can help somebody else out there understand how or why this thing is happening, you know? So that's me, just insatiably curious, and if it's only left to me making my own assumptions, I just go a little nuts, because I don't trust my assumptions to be true. So yeah, if you don't have that curiosity and that need, you probably won't need a PhD, and you still can do research in the field. It's just, I'm a little older, and you know, if you're a clinician for a while, you might be able to become a research clinician later on, but I didn't want to have to wait that long, essentially, which, as long as a PhD can be, it is less, it's less waiting to be a researcher. The other nice thing about getting a PhD in SLP in United States is there's actually a deficit of people at the professor level, of researchers in our field. There's a fair number of folks who are going to be retiring soon, and the deficit's going to probably get even worse. So it doesn't hurt your job prospects. It actually just opens up other job possibilities. So if you get your clinical license, you do the clinical masters, you get your clinical license, and you get a PhD, you could work clinically. Nothing stops you from doing that. If you want to open up your own clinic, you can do that. If you want to work as a research professor, you can do that. If you want to work primarily at a teaching college as a professor, you can do that. So there's a lot of options out there. Or if you want to work at a hospital and also do some research, if it's like a research-based hospital, like a Stanford hospital or something attached to a university, you might be able to find something there too. So I also continued for it because it opened up opportunities rather than closing off opportunities. So that was me. That was why I made that decision. So that's another thing, but that's a much more specialized degree, and you want to be informed when you go into one. You want to kind of have at least some idea of what you're getting into. So from start to finish, if you come in with master music or like a BFA or an MA or an MFA or whatever you're coming in with, it's probably going to take you 3 years before you get your first job, which will be your clinical fellowship, and then a year after that, you actually get your license. So 4 years to get your clinical license, such that you can practice in your own right as your own clinician without the need of a supervisor. So there you go. That's how long it will take. You might not get financial aid for the whole thing, and competition to get into the graduate school level is fierce, but there are jobs available. There you go. So if you're interested, good luck to you. Come on in. Bye.